Fresh and
All right, welcome back to another episode of Fresh and Buds. I'm your host, Tommy Fresh, and as always, you are all of my buds. And today we have a great episode for you all. We're going to be joined by Bryan Gottlieb, who's going to hop on here in a few. And we're going to talk about all kinds of fun stuff. We're going to learn about them. We're going to talk about design. We're going to get, a little look into the brain behind a lot of all of our favorite cards in Flesh and Blood. So it's going to be a blast. But before we do all of that, I do want to give a shout out to the Patreon, which you can find in the show notes. Help keep the lights on, the mics hot. Get a little rewards out of it as well. Very cool. Every little bit helps. I also want to shout out the Buds Discord, which is a great safe space to hang out. A lot of great buds in there, which is free to join as always. And then if you're watching this on YouTube, give us a old like, comment, subscribe, comment something wild. Maybe we'll start a new segment called Listener of the Week, where if you comment something crazy, you might just make it. And once we get to 500 subscribers, as always, the big Levia adult cosplay is going to happen. Very cool, very cool. And also on Wednesdays, 9:30 Eastern, we do the Bud Rush Bellow with Mr. Vizzy, aka Gary. As always, producer Greg is on the scene. He's probably going to drop something right here. Wow, that was so great, Greg. And we have a special message from Charmer, which we didn't get to last week, this week. So without further ado, let's jump to Bryan. All right, well, we are here with, Mr. Bryan Gottlieb himself. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. Welcome to my Mahogany Fortress, where I host all my favorite podcasting friends. I know Flake is always very excited whenever he gets welcome into my Mahogany Fortress. Now you also have the password. You're able to visit whenever you want.
Oh, I love it. I love it. It looks like unbelievably cozy, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little jealous because
it's very wooden, and there's ups and downs that come with that. I will say, like, there is a good cozy vibe going. There's also like bees and woodpeckers trying to eat my house all the time, so it's like a give and take. You get a little bit of both sides.
Sure. We're always in a constant battle with nature. Maybe it's because we're living in their world, or
probably true.
Yeah. But I'm happy that you are here to join us, and we're gonna have a nice little chat. I've been looking forward to this, and I think we're all pretty excited about Flesh and Blood right now, and everything coming down the pipe. So. Before we get to any real Flesh and Blood talk, I do want to get a little bit of background on your history, which is a long history with trading card games.
Wait, you call me? I thought you were calling me old for a second there.
Okay, no. I just wise.
Old. It would be appropriate. It would be fine.
Wise and experienced, I think, is where we're going. High leveled.
Grizzled. I prefer grizzled.
Grizzled, yeah. Now you do have this long history with TCGs, a grizzled history with TCGs. Yep. Before we, get to Fab, where did card games come into your life?
Day one, pretty much. I mean, like I wasn't there for the alpha days of Magic, but I was there very soon after, 7 or 8 months into its life cycle. It just found its way across my purview, and kind of, not to be over dramatic about it, but it felt like a missing part of myself joined me at that point. Like, it was just the thing I had been looking for my whole life. I was instantly obsessed, playing Magic every second I could, and thinking about Magic every second I couldn't play. And, it certainly weaved in and out of my life after that initial introduction. I grew up a little bit, went to high school, went to college, pretty into girls at that point. So that kind of, you take a step back from Magic for a second, but it was always there in the background, always keeping track of it. And then, I dabbled with poker for a bit, and that kind of stepped in front of Magic for a bit. But always there was these TCGs in the background keeping my attention. And it wasn't just Magic, it was every TCG that was being released. I just wanted to know everything about them. I wanted to know rules, how they functioned, what other concepts were exciting in the TCG world. And it's pretty much continued for 30 years now. I've been living my life that way.
It's pretty awesome to hear that. Now, what is it about TCGs and just like physical card games and beyond that really, makes you so excited about them?
Yeah, there's something, unique, tangible real about TCGs. Like I also love video games, don't get me wrong, and video gaming is a huge part of my life. And I think a lot of the things I said about TCGs could very much apply to video games, but there is that element of just holding this piece in my hand and kind of like respecting it and cherishing it. And I guess like collectability matters to me. Like I like having cool stuff to add to my collection. That's certainly part of it. But I think probably more than that. And you have to go back to the era at which I found TCGs. It was the concept of the evolving metagame. Like now we have video games that do have evolving metagames. Certainly things like League of Legends, Teamfight Tactics, fighting games. Any game essentially at this point has an evolving metagame. But that was not the case back in 1994. It was kind of a very unique concept to Magic and, maybe a little bit in the RPG world. There's certainly a constant set of expansions coming. But for me, like Magic was my first exposure to the idea of a metagame and a constantly evolving game that just always offered something new. And I think that's what really tickled my brain in the right way.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, you get this set thing that is very, very fun, but still changes every single time you play it, and every single time, whatever developer decides to put out something new. And yeah. I mean, that is a great point. I had never really thought about video games that way, where, when I was younger, right, you just played the game, right? And it didn't change, and now like, every single time I log into a game, it's like, well, we have this big update for you.
Yeah, it's a very different world for sure.
Yeah. Now, what were your initial aspirations as a card gamer, because it's been a long history with it, where were your expectations with the games?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, like for me, I grew up in such a small, sheltered place. I lived in the middle of nowhere in rural upstate New York. We could occasionally get some TCG cards from a waterbed store about 30 minutes from my house. Don't ask me why the waterbed store was selling cards, but they did. But beyond that, it was like to get to another place where there were actually people playing and engaging with these games. Hour and a half, 2 hours. Nobody in my circle, short of my little brother, who I kind of indoctrinated into the world, was interested in TCG. So it never seemed like something that could become a large part of my life. I was never like, oh, I'll be a Pro Tour player, or it just seemed like a very distant goal. But certainly, I grow up, I move on, I move out of that small world, and I was aware of competitive Magic as it existed in the early days, but it wasn't something I endeavored to. It was only when I re-engaged with the game years later, in about 2007-ish, I moved to Las Vegas at that point, and I had been playing poker prior to that, so I was very much into like the competing tournament scene, and I just was done with poker. I wanted something else, and Magic started scratching that same itch, and dabbling in PTQs. I qualified for a Pro Tour at my first ever Magic GP, and I didn't really think like I was going to be a Pro Tour player, but then I kind of got a taste of it, and I'm like, oh, I like this. I want to do it again. And while it never became my priority, it was always there in the background and just something I like dabbled with from time to time, and built this weird network of people who are interested in what I was thinking and what I was doing in the TCG space without ever really being like, I want to make this happen. This has to be a thing for me. And certainly it was always in the background. Like I was working my jobs, I was going to law school, becoming a lawyer. All these things are like happening in the forefront. And it's always this thing in the background that just kind of taunting me, calling me as like almost what feels like it's supposed to be my real purpose, but it's just not the thing like I'm telling myself to engage with. And so I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I didn't have any expectations when it came to TCGs. It was just something I did, and whatever happened, happened.
It's almost as if TCGs had expectations for you rather
That's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah.
It's just like it's almost like some kind of predestined thing. It seems anyway, because when you go do life things, like I feel the same way, right? Like the card games had never left, but they were always there. So I totally understand that. Now, speaking of card games, Flesh and Blood. Now you say you've tried to keep up with new card games whenever they come out. Flesh and Blood comes onto the scene. When did you start learning about Flesh and Blood, getting into it, and bringing us to where you are now?
Yeah, so I was certainly hearing rumbles about Flesh and Blood, like a lot of the creators overlapped. It was coming across my Twitter feeds. It was on my websites, Channel Fireball, reading Magic articles, and here's something about Flesh and Blood. And I didn't really make much of it. There's just been a lot of games that come and go. And, like I said, I like to familiarize myself, but my expectation is most of them, I'll actually say, I expect none of them to become a large part of my life the way Magic was. And nothing ever had. I had played every game, but I had never played a tournament for a game besides Magic the Gathering in my entire life until I played my first Flesh and Blood tournament, a little over a year and a half ago now. And so it wasn't like I was expecting it to be like, oh, this is my new thing. But, I familiarized myself with it. About the time they announced their first pro circuit. And I'm like, well, what's going on here? Is there something interesting? And my own relationship with Magic at that point was complicated. I had been working as a content creator, doing my own podcast. I was writing articles for Star City Games. I was broadcasting Magic tournaments for Star City Games. And things were kind of in the midst of the pandemic. Everything was very uncertain, very fraught with peril, I would say. It seemed like a lot of things were not going the way I expected them to with Magic. And I wasn't searching for something new, but I was open to it. And I was just like, I'll play this game, see what's up. And I fell in love. It was just well, not immediately. I played my first ever games were with the Monarch Blitz decks, and I played a Prism versus Levia matchup. And I was like, well, this game doesn't seem very good. But for whatever reason, I kept going. And yes, then I fell very quickly in love as I explored more and started to get into Classic Constructed and, exploring Blitz a little bit. And as soon as I escaped the prison of those Monarch Blitz decks, I felt very good about what was going on. And I just dove in wholeheartedly. I ordered basically every card in the game, started building decks, not really having a scene in my area, just playing again with my little brother, and eventually getting to play my first Flesh and Blood tournament when I went to an SCG con, kind of the first SCG con after the pandemic down in Roanoke. And I was there mostly I was qualified for the SCG Invitational as a content creator. So I was there mostly to play Magic, but I didn't really care that much about Magic, and I did very poorly in the Magic event. And then day 2 rolls around and there's a Flesh and Blood PTQ, and I'm like, I definitely want to play this. And after that, I was like, oh, this is actually just the game I want to be playing. This is where I am focused now. This is what I want to do. And things very quickly spiraled after that.
It's kind of funny. You are not the first, and I'm sure you will not be the last person I talk to who shares the same experience with the Monarch Blitz decks. It seems to be a common theme, but it does speak to the power of Flesh and Blood that a lot of us can move past the Levia versus Prism matchup. And that
there was a lot of good stuff there. You could see there's something. I was like, this can't be the game. There's something more. Something is wrong with what I'm experiencing. I need to understand better, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah. Now, beyond that, what were your initial thoughts on the game engine itself, right? What was it about this game that kind of really dug its claws into you that no other game had except for Magic?
Yeah, it just stood out to me as a very well thought out, well designed game that was evocative. And that's the main thing that I really felt had been missing from Magic for a while. When I first found Magic, it was this weird, mystical spell book of cards where you were summoning dragons and angels and all these fantasy tropes that I was really into at the time. And certainly my tastes evolved over time, but what never really left me was the desire to have stories told through these cards. I wanted them to feel correct. I wanted them to represent something, to feel like I was engaging with something bigger than just pieces of cardboard. And Flesh and Blood was just doing that to a ludicrous degree. Just a really, really focused approach to storytelling via card, to having a game system that allows you to tell whatever stories you want to tell through its rules. And that's what was so exciting to me, because I play something, and like I said, I've played almost every TCG. I play Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't get anything from that. There's numbers being thrown back and forth. And I don't think the game is bad. I enjoy playing a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Every now and then, but I don't get the resonance. I play the Pokemon game. I don't actually feel like I'm doing Pokemon training. There's no real representation of this really cool concept within the cards to me. And I think that is something that almost every TCG ever has fallen short on for me. Versus System is another one that comes to mind, where it just like I didn't feel like I was doing superhero stuff. It was just like, here's the rules. And Flesh and Blood was the exact opposite. It felt like they started with the foundation first, with the storytelling first, and then had a beautiful rules engine to work on top of that. And it just seemed legit and it seemed real. And I trusted my gut in terms of like, I think this is something special, and I'm very glad I did.
Yeah, and we're all very glad you did too, because we'll get to it in a bit, but you've been doing some work with LSS, and the product has been amazing. But before we get to that, you mentioned broadcasting. A couple weeks back, we were joined by Craig Krempels, a local bud of mine, and someone you've shared the coverage booth with in the past. How did you end up doing TCG coverage, and how have you liked doing it for Flesh and Blood?
I wish like all these questions, I wish I just like had a good answer, but it's all just like dumb luck. And I know the right people, and I'm like, I tell someone, hey, I want to do this thing. And they're like, oh, what the hell, we'll give you a shot. For whatever reason, people like giving me shots at things. I don't know why. But I think I tend to do pretty well when given shots, and I tend to deliver on them. And I got this shot to do Magic. Well, first I got an offer from my good friend, Jerry Thompson, to come do his already popular Magic podcast. So I stepped in that role, and we did very well with that. And then I parlayed that into a writing gig with Star City, just kind of saying, hey, I want to expand on what we're talking about in the podcast. Do you have a platform for me? Again, just asking and being told yes and doing that. And then once I was doing that, I was like, well, man, you guys do the SCG tour. I feel like I'm good at this. I talk a lot about Magic. I think I can do this. What do you think about giving me a shot to do this? And then sure enough, my buddy Cedric says yes. And then I'm doing Magic broadcasting. So as far as how I got into it, dumb luck and asking. That's really all I can say. Knowing the right people, like that's some of it too.
Yeah, well, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? And
that's true.
That certainly, is proven here. But what about Flesh and Blood? How have you liked doing coverage for Flesh and Blood? Because it's certainly a different, world, right? Certainly still.
I love it. I think it's an awesome game for broadcasting, particularly because we don't play the non-games, and like that's just a huge percentage of what we did in Magic. And I'm not here to knock Magic. I love Magic, and there's a lot of great that comes with Magic's system of variance and its system of mana. Like I've sung that as a praise of Magic for literally decades now, but there's the truth that when you're broadcasting a Magic tournament, you will cover a lot of non-games, and the highs are really high, but the lows are really low. And Flesh and Blood just felt more consistent, more visceral, more real. Like you just got to very real game states over and over. And look, I am very much aware that sometimes a close game in Flesh and Blood is nothing but an illusion. Like you leverage your life total, and just because you won a game at one life does not mean actually the game was close. Yeah. But when you're doing a broadcast, it's very easy to sell it as a close game when it's at one life. And that matters a lot. You want to have that tension. You don't want to have predetermined outcomes. And Flesh and Blood just presents that all over the place. Beyond just the tremendous strategic depth, it's also a very simple game in a lot of ways to cover, because usually you're dealing with one discrete combat interaction. That's what you want to talk about. And things can get, complicated for sure. You get into Kano turns, or you start dealing with illusionists and you have an arena presence. That changes things a bit. But usually there is one discrete interaction going on, that offense-defense exchange, and it makes for a really nice, compelling broadcast, sort of in line with like a baseball broadcast in a lot of ways. And it's fortunate for me because I always modeled my style of Magic broadcasting off baseball broadcasting. But I think it applies to Flesh and Blood 10 times more than it ever did to Magic. And there's just a really nice rhythm for casting the games.
Yeah, and well, you do an excellent job, and the baseball broadcasting does come through. I will say that, which is very cool as a baseball fan myself. Now, one question for you in terms of the coverage. Is there anything you'd like to see improved or changed about Flesh and Blood coverage, or just
Absolutely.
Something we can add to it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, this game is young. It's nascent. It is expanding rapidly, growing rapidly, adding more and more players, adding more events, and there's no question that a lot of what we have done in the early days of Flesh and Blood coverage has been kind of glued together, duct taped together. I think I want to see more of a focus on really high quality production. I would love to do like news desk type stuff, all the things that really are just like the hallmarks of a good broadcast. I just want it to feel more professional, more polished, because the gameplay is there. We need to do a job being able to just highlight that gameplay. So, higher quality cameras showing the arena, some type of telestration type deals. All these things are on my wish list, and they're things I would love to build towards. And I think we will continue to build the world of Flesh and Blood coverage as time goes on. It's just like sometimes the expectations for the game, they really feel akin to a game that's been around for decades, I think. And I get that because it is so polished and it is so good and people love it so much. They want it to kind of be at that state. But, if you are a Magic fan like myself, I don't have to tell you what the first 20 years of Pro Tour coverage looked like. It was not a pretty sight. And only really in the last few years have they really hit their stride. 28 years in, with $1 billion brand behind them, have they been able to really start delivering on these kind of epic experiences and more professional, polished broadcasts. And do I think we can get to that point? 100%. 100% I believe we can get there. It is going to take time, though, and it's something we're going to have to build up, as we kind of move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Rome wasn't built in a day, and we're working on it. Now, before we get to some design talk, which I'm very excited to get to, I have a segment in the show called the Fresh Phase, where I ask the guest what their favorites are of a couple different questions here. If you're game for it, I'm game for it.
Absolutely. Hit me.
Let's do it. First, who is your favorite hero?
This answer changes every time someone asks me it. I think right now it's Azuri. Prior to Azuri coming on the scene, it was Viserai. Sometimes I still feel like it's Viserai. Like I just love playing Viserai. Some days I feel like a Guardian main. Some days I'm kind of rooting for the underdogs and I'm behind Azalea, but it's somewhere in that mish of answers is my favorite hero.
That's fair. What is your favorite weapon?
It's going to be a controversial one. I'm going to say Rosetta Thorn, and it's not because I think Rosetta Thorn is like okay and necessarily a card that should have ever been made, but it is a very satisfying play pattern, a very powerful play pattern, and it sort of informed a lot of my early days with Flesh and Blood. Like it was very much in the Runeblade metagame, and Rosetta Thorn is just kind of an iconic part of Flesh and Blood to me now. So I think that's why I lean that way.
It certainly will go down in the annals of Flesh and Blood history. I can tell you that now.
Yes, I think it will.
What is your favorite equipment?
And I really love the Assassin equipment. I think Black Tech Whisperers are just such a cool, flavorful piece of that entire hero. We could go with Mask as well. Like I think either of the two initial Assassin equipment really stand out to me, and certainly I bring some bias to that answer. But I just love the gameplay flow. I love all the questions they ask, and again, like mechanical resonance. They feel like they are telling a real story as part of their gameplay operations, which I really, really like.
Yeah, they're awesome, and some of the best art in the game as well, I would say.
Agreed.
What is your favorite run-of-the-mill card you put in your deck, attack action, non-attack action, instant?
I'm a Sink Below fan. It's efficient. It does everything you want, fixes a lot of hands. Like as far as just a generic run-of-the-mill good piece of glue, Sink Below has to get a vote for me. It's been part of almost every Flesh and Blood deck I've ever registered for an event, so pretty high up there.
It's iconic. It is iconic, and funny enough, I was looking at both Sink Below and like Ravenous Rabble the other day, and I was like, it started to like, I was like, oh, this is a classic Flesh and Blood card, which is like crazy that the game's only 2019, and I'm already referring to things as classic cards, which is
I agree with you 100%. It does. I mean, I think that's a sort of a side effect of growth, right? Like you think about where Flesh and Blood was just a few years ago and how much it's grown and how much our community has grown, how much what being a Flesh and Blood player, like what that means has grown. I think classifying things as classic makes sense because we're just living in a different world now.
Yeah. And it's pretty awesome. Now, Bryan, I do want to talk about design because, you've been helping with LSS, and I want to, shed some light on what that's been like and what it's been like for you and for them. So first off, when did you get in touch with LSS or the vice versa? And when did you get asked or otherwise to help with design?
Yeah, so it happened pretty early on in my dalliance with Flesh and Blood. Like I said, I had dove in pretty wholeheartedly, and I was tweeting a bit about it. And also at the same time, I mentioned Star City Games changing its approach to Magic coverage and not doing SCG Live anymore, not doing articles anymore. So I just kind of put out a tweet like, hey, certainly open to opportunities in the gaming space, kind of just thinking like, oh, some Magic website will reach out to me and I'll probably write for someone else before, I don't know, going on to be a lawyer again or whatever it is I was going to do at that point. And then James reached out to me and was just like, move to New Zealand. And I'm like, well, that seems like a pretty aggressive start, but we should at least have a conversation. And we did have that conversation. It went very well. And then I went on to do a kind of consulting contracting role in the development of Dynasty, which was my first set that I got to be involved with. And it's funny because like looking back on it now, I don't think I knew enough about Flesh and Blood to actually be all that good at my job. But I did know a lot about design, and I think I was able to bring a lot of that to the table, and it kind of informed, James's opinion of me, and just, I guess even with my sort of still nascent knowledge of Flesh and Blood, I did enough where he was happy with my work and basically reached out to me wanting to make it a full-time thing. And that's kind of the state we're in now. I am a contractor for LSS. That probably belies my role a little bit. It is quite a bit bigger than just an average contractor. And we are working on ways to kind of formalize that. But for the time being, I am a contractor. And once we get things a little bit more sorted out and stable, maybe get some visas in place, maybe find a nice house for me to live in New Zealand, then my role will be a little bit more concrete.
Which would be very, very cool. Now, you mentioned that you knew enough about design when working on Dynasty, right? Where did that knowledge of design and background in design come from?
Yeah, so it's something that I'd just always been interested in. Like I said, just devouring rules for years and years of all TCGs, and a lot of my Magic writing, podcasting stuff was just very much rooted in speaking about the game through a lens of design. And through doing that, people at Wizards of the Coast got familiar with my work and certainly thought they saw something in my writing that was indicative of someone who had good design fundamentals. And, I did some testing with them and they were pretty keen to have me do some work on Magic. So I did eventually do that as a contractor. Was occasionally flirting with the idea of going to Wizards full time and never quite worked out on, well, kind of my end. They didn't really come to the table with what I was looking for, and ultimately I walked away from it. But that's where I got my first break, is just kind of consulting on Kamigawa and Neon Dynasty, actually.
Interesting. Now, were there things about Flesh and Blood that you kind of had ideas about in terms of design, things that you felt could be expanded on or improved upon when you kind of came on board?
No, I think the thing that made me want to work on it so much was that, like I said, there was this core language for storytelling. So it wasn't so much that like I wanted to change the way Flesh and Blood was designed. It was that I wanted to play in the sandbox that was made, and I wanted to tell stories with the rules that were already in place and think about how these really, really elegant, awesome mechanics could be made into new classes, new things. And it was very fortunate that day one of my contract with LSS, I started working on Assassin, and it was nice to kind of get a blank slate. And that wasn't the initial intention. Like, we had sort of an Assassin in the bank that I was brought in to try and tune up a little bit and give my thoughts on, and essentially my thoughts were, this is not working and we should look to do something different. And if you guys are comfortable with it, I'd like to propose something. And that kind of snowball conversation was what eventually became Arachne. So I was able to, have a really direct, sizable influence and a way to play in that sandbox right off the bat. Like just making an entirely new class. What more can you do in terms of just like being able to express yourself within the rule set? That's as good as it gets, I think.
Yeah, and it's pretty incredible. Like Arachne, when Arachne was released, right, or spoiled, and we got to see the contract mechanic and how it worked, and how you got silver and you can buy back things. It was just like everything like was really clean and made sense. Now, I don't know if you can share what the original Assassin was kind of like, that you felt like it didn't work. But if you could, that would be awesome to hear at least a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into specifics just because there's always a chance that we revisit a mechanic down the road or we find a way to make it work. Essentially, though, there was like a game state tracking burden with the version we were working on that was just it made it so it wasn't pleasant to play. You felt like you were doing some work while you were managing the first version of Assassin. And, maybe someday we'll solve that problem and you'll get to see what the initial look at Assassin was supposed to be like.
Yeah, hopefully. Now, what are some challenges that you've kind of faced being behind the scenes with Flesh and Blood? Whether it's just how do we make this work, or does this like the core game engine doesn't allow for certain things?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is just location at this point. Like I now fly to Auckland fairly regularly to work with the team. I'm about to take my 4th trip down in a couple of weeks, but that's a long trip. It's sometimes, if everything goes well, 16 hours on a plane. When things go nightmarishly, it could lead to a few days on a plane, which is not my favorite. And, I'm a big believer in remote work. Like I'm a big believer in the quality of life it's brought to people. And I like doing aspects of my job remotely. But there are some things about design that it's just better to be in a room with people and talk things out and play the games face to face. And that does matter quite a bit. So one of the biggest hurdles has just been my time and being able to be in Auckland as much as I would like to be. Like I said, we are trying to get some more options in place as far as that goes. And I think I'm moving towards a split of my time where I'll probably spend a slight majority of my time in Auckland rather than in the States going forward, probably by the end of this year, hopefully.
That'd be very exciting. Now, top-down design is something that I heard about, gosh, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. For the first time, I was playing Magic and Innistrad came out. And that was the first time I was a little bit blown away by the idea of, we want to think about what this is and then figure out what the game would do to what that is, right? So how important, and I have a feeling I know what the answer is going to be based on the conversation already. How important is top-down design to you with Flesh and Blood?
Tremendous. It's tremendously important. Look, if you're not telling a story with these cards, they're just numbers. That's the essence of card games. If there is not something there, if there's not resonance, if there's not something you can cling to as a person that says, this hero speaks to me, this specialization speaks to me, this piece of equipment, I understand what it's trying to convey. If you can't do that, you're never going to get that level of buy-in that actually makes a great game. You might get people participating in your game. They might play your tournaments and, try and take a few dollars from your game. That can absolutely happen. But if you're going to make an actual impassioned fan base like Flesh and Blood now has, so much of it is rooted in good fundamentals of design, top-down design being a huge part of that.
Yeah, and it's been a home run, at least from my perspective here with Flesh and Blood so far. I mean, I think Flick Knives is one I always go back to. I'm like, we want to flick knives. What would it do? It would do this. And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. Now, in terms of game design with Flesh and Blood, have you kind of developed any kind of like core philosophies? Like, when you sit down, do you have like these mental checks on what you're doing with a card or kind of like a class or even a mechanic?
I'm sure I do. I don't know that they're actually like tangible checks I could put into words, though. I'm just sure there's a process I mentally go through as I'm looking through a card and like sort of entering the card's text in our internal tools. And there's always like a level of just review and then re-review and then read it in this form and read it in that form and think about it in this context. And it's not rehearsed. It's not like, oh, I'm going to put it through this 10-step process and then I'll come out the other side with a card. But certainly there's a lot of things I fall back on and just a lot of principles I'm starting to fall back on. Like now, over a year of experience designing Flesh and Blood, I'm starting to feel finally like I have this knowledge vault. I remember just like the first few times I was working with James and just being like, oh my God, his wealth of knowledge is massive. Like, how can I ever contribute when this man has like 10 years of ideas welled up in his head, 10 years of heuristics, 10 years of, oh, I know this won't work because we've done it before. Like, how can I ever get myself up to that level of competency? I'm finally starting to feel like I'm there now. And it's not about like specific things. It's just about I've tried enough stuff, done enough stuff, seen enough stuff at this point that I'm getting a sense of what we can and cannot do successfully. But the game system still surprises me sometimes. And I think that's, again, a really great thing about it is we continue to find new, exciting, innovative things to do, both within kind of the four corners of the card, in formats more broadly speaking. I think we're just doing a good job of continuing to push the bounds of what the game's capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at a very distant view, you could look at the game, right? And I've heard people say this like, well, it's fours and threes and that's what it is. How can they expand on that? Yet they continue to do it. So it's very cool that even kind of gives like this little playground for design.
To that point, I remember once listening to my friends over at Arsenal Pass, who I love dearly, both of them. And I remember, I think it was Brendan said something to the effect of like, oh, how many 2-for-6s can you make? And I'm like, 20,000, 30, like I could all day and just rattle off interesting 2-for-6s. Like it's not about the 2-for-6. Like, yeah, those numbers are, pretty locked and you have to do some work to get away from those numbers. But the stories that those cards are telling, what they're accomplishing, it feels like an infinite canvas to me. It really does.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Now, in terms of the canvas, have there been any ideas that have been left on the cutting floor, and perhaps some that you are itching to revisit at some point?
So many. I mean, we're just like, honestly, we're ruthless with our approach to cycling through ideas. We're very big believers in fast moving iteration. So, sometimes an idea that seems like it has really good promise off the back, we'll spend a couple days in development and just not hit right. And then it's gone. We're not going to you have to be willing to accept your mistakes, not try and force things. And at the same time, like, it's all about balance. So sometimes you do have to force things. You have to lean in really hard. But there's just been so many things that we have left on the cutting room floor at this point. And I always leave open the door to go back to them. I think it's really important to just not take biases from previous failures and just be open to the idea like, okay, this did not work in this scenario, but maybe 5 years down the road, this card's going to be the perfect thing. And we have, databases and data banks full of ideas that we'll explore at a future point and see if they make the cut in their second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever it is. I mean, I've seen some cards get many, many tries at this point, and just because they didn't make it 6 times doesn't mean they won't make it the 7th time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we have Dusk Till Dawn coming out here in a month, basically. What are you, and I know you can't give specifics here, but in a general sense, what are you most excited for people to see in Dusk Till Dawn? And can you hint?
I think it's just really exciting to bring back a couple classes that have been out of the game for a while, like a new Light Illusionist, a new Shadow Runeblade. Those are beloved classes in some instances, hated by others. Maybe polarizing classes is a better way to put it.
Yeah.
But that's good. That's kind of what engenders that fierce loyalty and sometimes that fierce hatred, and all of that is part of a TCG. And I think bringing these classes back into the mix is a really exciting moment in our game. And it's just like really is the fruition of the Living Legend system, right? Like, again, talking about classic Flesh and Blood, but we're in it now. We're in it now for over 3 years, and we're starting to see the vision come to light of these heroes having really strong performances over the course of multiple years, and then they kind of go away for a while. We get our break from Light Illusionists. We get our break from Shadow Runeblades. They sit on the bench for a little bit, and then they come back. And I think, like, hopefully what's becoming clear is that this is a game worth buying into for the long term. And I don't mean that from a dollars and cents perspective. I mean it from I love Light Illusionist, but there's no Light Illusionist for me right now. And I am receptive to that feedback, and I do know that can be frustrating. But I hope you found something to occupy your time in the non-Light Illusionist days. And now with Light Illusionist coming back, all those fans of Prism can be absolutely over the moon to return to the hero they love. And I hope it feels a little special to them when it happens.
Yeah, and I think, based on the reactions I've seen so far, I think, well, the Light Illusionist fans are certainly excited. I can't say the same for a lot of other people, but hopefully it's a different experience. Now, we've explored...
I promise you a different experience. How about that? I'm willing to say that.
Thank you. You heard it here first, folks. Now, we've explored quite a few regions of Wraith at this point. Some we have not hit yet. Which region of Wraith are you most excited to visit?
I am really excited for a region that I don't think anyone knows about. That's what I'll say.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's
okay.
Probably as close as I can give to any information about it. But, we're learning more about the world of Wraith all the time, I think.
And I am very excited to learn about that place whenever we do learn about it. Now, I do have some listener questions here, Bryan, if you're willing to answer some.
Oh, absolutely.
Cool. These come from the Buds Discord. Great place to hang out. For anybody listening, please check it out. It is in the show notes, free to join. First comes from my co-host on the Bud Rush Bellow, Gary, aka Mr. Viz, who asks, which card from Outsiders was your favorite in limited testing?
In limited testing, huh? I think this is like probably a weird answer, but I would go Fleetfoot Sandals, and I know like that's a card that is not very good, but it can be in the right spots, and like finding the spots where that card succeeded was a very, very cool part of my Outsiders experience. And I do think there is a lot of joy in finding a card that is really bad. Like, it's just not a good card. It's clear on its face. It does so many things worse than so many other cards out there. But like, it does something. It's important in specific spots, and finding those spots was a real joy of the limited experience for me. So that ranks very, very high. I'd put Be Like Water up there as well. I think Be Like Water was a really critical part of just unlocking the ninja class for limited and making it feel really good.
Yeah. I mean, Fleetwood Sandals. That's. I did not expect that answer, and I'm glad it was.
I believe that.
Next, we have a question from Crixus, who asks, from a game design standpoint, what are the biggest concerns with balancing when providing support to classes that need it? And he says, for example, more brute blue sixes, which at this point we all know the answer to that one.
Yeah, I question whether brute needs blue sixes. I'll say that, but they could stand to be better. And I think, again, we move through the progression of Flesh and Blood. We have 3 years under our belt now. And I hope people are starting to get the picture that if your hero is bad, it will not always be bad. That is not how this works. It's not like they get left behind forever. They might get left behind for a period of time. You might have some lean days. Go talk to the Azalea cult when you feel bad about your hero's lean days, as they sat there for over 2 years begging for their hero to be able to get a single solitary living legend point. Just one. That's all they wanted. Just 1 point. And now Azalea is a very, very strong hero, a very important part of the metagame, maybe becoming a more important part of the metagame as we move past the Oldham days. So patience is my first thing I want to say to those people. But in terms of like what we worry about, it's just making sure we are able to deliver a power spike to those heroes while staying true to who they are. We don't want to invalidate what makes a hero themselves. We want to find a way for them to succeed in kind of their core operating procedures. And I think Azalea has done that. Like, again, huge dominated arrows. That's Azalea's MO. She is leveraging red in the ledger. We didn't have to make a Ranger sword for Azalea to go be good after a lot of talk of how Rangers could never be competitive because their bow is such a limitation. The bow is a limitation, but it's core to the Ranger class. And I think we did a really good job of just staying true to those Rangers and still delivering a nice little power spike for them. And I'd say the same for Ninja as well. I mean, like, Katsu hasn't had quite the limelight of the Rangers in the post-Outsider world, but I do think we did a good job staying true to what Ninjas are, and I think Katsu got quite a bit better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Next question comes from Mike Popovich, Papa Mike, who asked, people often say Bryan when they are really referring to the LSS dev team. Did you anticipate becoming the face of the dev team when you started working for LSS?
I wouldn't say I anticipated it, but I was aware it was a probable outcome. I mean, I think like only recently did the Flesh and Blood Twitter account pass me in terms of followers. So where like I have reach equal to the core game account, it's pretty self-evident that when I say things, it's going to reach as many people as possible. So it wasn't my intention, but I knew it was very much a possibility. And it was something I was comfortable with because it's really hard to be a person on the internet, like of just a moderate Q list niche micro celebrity. Is one of the worst fates any human can endure. Like, it's really, really tough. You have to be really careful. And if you don't know how to do it, it can be scary. It can be overwhelming, and you can do some real damage. And I kind of know how to do it, and I'm still capable of doing some real damage. So I think it is good that someone came along with some reach that was able to talk about these things. And I think it's been an important part of just opening up our dialogue with our players and letting them know, like, we are thinking about the same things you are. We are here. We are listening. We are following. We don't always agree with your stance, but we're receptive to it. We're considering it. And I think that is a critical part of just game design in general these days. I think it's very, very important, whether you make video games, TCGs, tabletop games, you have to be engaging with your audience where they are. And I think being part of Twitter and engaging like a somewhat typical Twitter user with all the faults that carries with it, I think that's an important part of representing the game. And there's things I could do better, I'll say that. But ultimately, I am genuine probably to a fault, and I hope people will give me grace in the moments where I maybe take things a little bit too far.
You know what? You're a passionate guy, and passion is a good thing. And
that is the truth.
That's all that matters. Now, the next question comes from it's pronounced Visarai on Discord, who asks, does arcane damage have a separate cost balance than physical attacks? What considerations do developers have to make when designing wizard cards?
I mean, it definitely operates on a very different axis, right? Like certainly, I think at this point, everyone sort of knows the meme about the formula and has moved on from that actually being a real thing, as it's pretty demonstrably not. I wish it was. It would make my life a lot simpler if I just had a formula I could go plug in to make Flesh and Blood cards. So there's no formula for making arcane damage cards, but it's a totally different set of considerations. You have to think of certainly a lot of the things that interact with arcane damage, arcane barrier, spell void, all these damage prevention effects. Like, you really have to consider how widely available are they? Are they being played? What happens to the dynamic of this matchup when you're asking players to change their equipment suite and account for these things? Like, all these things are very, very important. So I do think arcane damage is quite a bit harder to design around. There's a lot more considerations, but there's no real shortcuts to that. It's just you have to feel it out, get the numbers in the right place. And I think we've done a really good job with wizards thus far. Like, I think they're very unique. The moments where they are extremely powerful, they can feel like a lot for sure. But I really like the spot that Icelander has found herself in Classic Constructed throughout her existence. And certainly she's taken some tweaks, some nerfs to get to a point where now she's, I don't even know that I believe she's on the lower power side. Like, I think she has a couple bad matchups, but I still think she's a very real hero. And, maybe with this latest metagame change might even be a larger part of the metagame. But I really like how she's influenced the game over her time present. And even Kano, I love Kano as the wild card. Just like, check them, make sure they're being honest, make sure they're bringing their arcane barrier to the and if they're not, punish them. And I think that's a good feature to have in your game. And certainly, again, how many people love playing Wizards? Like, it's a really, really big identity point for our players, and we want to continue to preserve that. So it's a lot of work, but it's worth it, is what I would say when it comes to costing and balancing arcane damage.
Yeah. And the next question is kind of on the other end of the spectrum here. You got Wizards, big brain, and now Sigma asks, how hard is it to balance Brute? Which is, simple, to the point, like Brute. How do you?
It's all hard.
Yeah,
none of this is easy. Like, I wish it was easy. It's hard to balance Flesh and Blood, and we're gonna mess things up. That's just how it's gonna go. I promise you, there'll be another mistake, a Starvo level mistake at some point. It's just gonna happen, and that it is what it is. But Brute in particular, I don't find it harder to balance than any other class. I think it's got some terms of engagement that mean it's harder for it to be the best deck. But I'll say that's okay, too. Not every hero has to be a metagame dominator. I do think every hero has to have its moment in the sun, has to be viable, probably should be the best deck for a tournament. And I think there's moments where Brute has been the best deck for tournaments. Like, that's not something it's necessarily failed at, particularly in Blitz, where Rhinar extremely explosive. And then even if you look at, the post-Worlds Calling won by Chandler Toe on Rhinar, like, that's a big result for Rhinar, and Rhinar has won many big tournaments. So I think Brute is not easy. It takes a specific mindset to play. It takes a really, really talented mindset to play well. And I think people often want it to be just kind of unga bunga smash, and that is not how Brute works. But it is a lot of fun to kind of bring tools to the Brute class, and just like every other class, they're going to have their moment. They'll get there.
Well, I'm hoping for some Levia tools soon. Next question comes from Dead Summer, who asks, how often do you collaborate with the creatives team when designing cards? What is the process you all take when wanting to implement specific lore or flavor into mechanics of a card?
Yeah, so a lot of that happens. James is very much like the liaison between creative and the design development team. So it's not often I work directly with the creative team. It kind of just gets passed back and forth. But certainly there is a lot of back and forth that goes on where, design development will be like, oh, we want to make a hero that does this thing. And then we talk to creative about it, and they're like, well, it could work in this way. And they go, well, what if the hero did this? And, in some ways we do get to have our little moments of contributing to creative. And it's really exciting. It's one of my favorite parts of the job, actually, when I get to have, it's nice to design the mechanics of a hero, but for some reason I still get more excited when I get a little input on the story of a hero and exactly what's going on and how the hero has reached a particular state. And we could talk more about that in about a year, probably. I'll have a more fulsome story to tell.
Oh, nice. Well, I hope you'd like to come back then. I do want to add a question to that. Riptide, the hook anchor thing, right? He's holding it. Was there ever any thoughts of giving him some kind of hook anchor thing to play around with, or was that just pure flavor?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it. Ultimately, the hook is like kind of a trap, right? Okay. Like, I mean, that's what it's supposed to represent, is just he uses that to ensnare his victims. And I understand, like, you see it and you're like, ooh, that looks like a weapon. Yeah. And people get very excited about it. And, who's to say, maybe one day that'll be paid off. But it wasn't like a core part of the hero identity or anything like that. It is just a representation of the hero, which came out awesome, I think, by the way. And Riptide already amassing legions of fans, despite being the newest ranger to take up that mantle at the bottom of the metagame. But lots of Riptide supporters out there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Next question comes from Capolo, who says, Brian, as a fellow squirrel fan, are there any squirrels in the world of Wraith? Will we see either animal heroes or animal allies, not dragons, in the future?
I would love to get some squirrels into the world of Wraith. I don't know the biology all that well, whether they're presently there. I'll see if I can drop them off or something like that. I will do my part to see more animals in Wraith. Of course, I am an animal lover. I think that's clear to anyone who follows me. And you should know I would love to see animals in Wraith. So we'll see what we can do.
And to wrap it up in the animal theme, we have two questions, one from Greg, our producer, and one from Flake. Greg asked, pond life update, anything fun happening out there in upstate New York? And where is the peacock, from Flake?
Yeah, so I just captured a snapping turtle this morning. I posted it over on my Twitter page, which was a really exciting development. Probably about 8 months ago now, we saw a giant snapping turtle wandering through our yard, and we captured him and rehomed him because snapping turtles can be very detrimental to the ecosystem of a pond. I'm starting to suspect that may have been a lady snapping turtle, and she may have left some friends in my pond because I was sort of raking along the shore today, and I happened to dug up a little snapping turtle, and I grabbed him. He very nearly almost got my finger, which is not a joke. Like, you can lose a finger to a snapping turtle 100%. So after I narrowly dodged a snapping turtle attack, I went and got a shovel and scooped him up and put him in a bucket and rehomed him to, we have a relative's property about 10 minutes down the road, and anything we capture, we just kind of rehome on this property where nobody lives. It's just wooded property. But there's water there. And so we've dropped off about 6 groundhogs, one giant snapping turtle, now a second small snapping turtle. I think that's it for the list of animals we've currently contributed to that property. But that was the big pond thing for today. As far as the peacock, it has not been spotted since its one appearance. And I was in Auckland when the peacock came. I had someone staying at my house, and they sent me the videos of the peacock waltzing by on my security footage. And I didn't really understand what's happening. I still do not understand what happened, but there's a peacock out there somewhere, and maybe it'll come by again. We'll see.
I hope it does. Now, Brian, I had a blast talking to you. This was awesome. I want to thank you for giving me your time and agreeing to come on. It's been excellent. You're a wealth of knowledge. I do hope you come back soon. And I hope that, your travels to Auckland are all great. Can you please plug anything you'd like to plug? And thank you.
It's just Flesh and Blood, man. Just keep playing Flesh and Blood. That's all I really care about at this point. I have podcasts and socials and all that stuff. But ultimately, so much of my work and life is devoted to this game. And I know all your listeners are out there playing it. And I appreciate it so much. I think you are allowing not only myself, but like the whole team to really live a dream right now. Like, we're developing and producing this game that we all genuinely love. We love playing, we love designing, we love talking about it. And the Flesh and Blood fans are what make that possible. And I just am blown away by how passionate Flesh and Blood fans are. It is become a real fan base so quickly. And it's one thing to enjoy a card game. There's certainly many card games that are enjoyed. This is a fan base, though. These are people who enjoy the heroes, they enjoy the lore, they enjoy the social scene, they enjoy the cosplay. There's so many aspects to our game that are just growing so rapidly, and that is because of people like you, people like your listeners. So I am just thankful. I don't want to plug anything. Just keep enjoying the game. Keep letting me know what we can do better. That's all I ask for.
Well, thank you very much. And I will be putting your socials in the show notes for anybody who is interested. Brian's awesome, and you should follow him on Twitter, at least to see the animals. My God.
Yeah, I think that's the main upside. Everything else is sort of throwaway, but there are good animals that come across.
And you all can continue to find me on Twitter at FreshBudsPod. Like, comment, subscribe on the YouTube. Check out the Discord. Check out the Patreon. That's all in the show notes in the link tree below. We're getting closer to 500 subscribers on the YouTube, finally pushing that a little bit. Once we hit that, I will be doing a full Leviah adult cosplay, and that will be a ton of fun. See it. I am terrified. Now, Brian,
before dusk till dawn. Let's see if we can hit Leviah cosplay before dusk till dawn.
I'm hoping. Now, I always like to end the show talking a little bit about food. I would like you to feature some food that you're enjoying right now, something local to you, something you've had in your travels, anything that maybe even you're just hungry for currently.
I'm a pizza fanatic. I could always talk about pizza, probably too much. Honestly, I should eat less pizza. Today, I wandered over to a local farm stand, and they had some fresh made tamales that I had for lunch, which were excellent. Love our local tamale place. And I am just an absolute food adorer to my own detriment. So if anyone has tips for not loving food so much, that's actually what I am currently interested in. It's why do they make it so good if you're not supposed to eat it all? I don't understand.
It doesn't make sense. It does not.
It doesn't.
Well, thank you again, Bryan. We ran out of time for Charmer, but we'll get to him next week, I'm sure. Everybody, please have a good week.